Coming up on Battleground Wisconsin Now with Fraley and Opoien. Under the dome, Governor Evers orders Wisconsinites to stay home. Outside the bubble, will Democrats and Republicans see eye to eye on a relief bill? Those items plus more as Battleground Wisconsin with Fraley and Opoien begins now.
Welcome to Battleground Wisconsin Now with Fraley and Opoien. I'm Jessie Opoien, opinion editor for the Cap Times, and my co-host is Brian Fraley, president of Edge Messaging. We are broadcasting remotely in this world of social distancing. So how's it going over there, Brian?
You know, we're good here at the Fraley compound, and I hope you and yours are doing well as well.
We are. It's no guarantee that Hildy, my dog, will not bark during this recording, but
that's okay. She's a good girl.
Yeah.
Well, let's start under the dome with Governor Evers' order today.
Yeah, so we've got we're calling it a safe at home order. You could call it a lockdown. You could call it shelter in place. I think every state has a different name for it, but essentially it's the same thing, and that's stay at home except for any essential travel or shopping or work that you may have to do. And we're still figuring out exactly what that means. The order was released today, just earlier today, and tomorrow it'll go into effect. We've got some time to figure it out, but I think in a lot of ways this sort of codifies what was already being suggested and recommended, but gives it penalty of law and enforcement. But I think everyone's still kind of trying to figure out how they function in this new world, and the message that we've been hearing to keep ourselves safe is to stay home and keep others safe is to stay home, but figuring out how to continue to implement that in a way that balances out with the economy is going to be a challenge.
I think one of the things that surprised people is the length of the order, that it goes through the third week of April. Yeah. I think people weren't expecting that based on what they had heard from the governor up through Saturday. Let's take a look here at the current Wisconsin caseload, and you'll understand why they're doing this. Let's look at it. The 457 is the cases as of today, Tuesday the 24th. And they said approximately 20% of them have been hospitalized. If we go and look at the capacity, this is the real reason why we're doing this, right? We have about 11,000 beds in Wisconsin. We have 2,600 ICU beds, although they're going to be converting more of them to ICU beds in short order, and 620 ventilators. And that is why they talk about flattening the curve, right? They want to slow the spread of this disease.
That's right. The point isn't necessarily that we're trying to. I mean, obviously, it'd be great if people didn't get it, but it's not necessarily that we can prevent people from getting it. It's that we can spread out the amount of time that people are getting it, and so we don't have these unmanageable surges like we're seeing in places like New York. And obviously, this is a different kind of population center than that, but you see the capacity issues that they're having there, and we're not there yet. And hopefully, we can prevent ourselves from getting there.
I think the governor's press conference yesterday, media availability update, whatever yesterday, was horrid, was awful. Monday's was awful. It was devoid of facts and empathy. And today was the exact opposite. Today, Andrea Palm, the Department of Health Services Secretary, explained why this was being done. Specifically, they said that the public health experts modeling showed that if these orders weren't enforced and these actions weren't taken, that there would be 22,000 hospitalizations in Wisconsin by April 8th. That's 2 weeks away. And as you said, go back to the slide previously, we don't have that many hospital beds. And so giving an explanation, a data-driven explanation of why these decisions were made, I think is imperative. There are times where the Evers administration has been very forthcoming, very transparent. Then there's been times where they seem to be a little bit loosey-goosey. So hopefully we'll have more of today's type of briefing and less of yesterday's. There's still a concern, though, Jessie, of what's going to happen on Tuesday, April 7th.
Approaching quickly, and I don't know that we have a whole lot more clarity other than this was something that the governor has addressed, and he gets asked about it every time he does one of these briefings, is what's going to happen with the election. And this is something he's been pretty steady on, and that's not wanting to change the date, not wanting to make any really dramatic changes. And you do have some local leaders throughout the state who are pushing for much larger scale changes, for changes in date for different accommodations. But in reality, there's not a whole lot that Tony Evers can do to make that happen, and he doesn't seem inclined to try to do that. His message has been pretty consistent, and that's emphasizing mail-in voting, mail-in absentee voting. The Wisconsin Elections Commission released its latest numbers today. More than 550,000 absentee ballots have been requested. That's, of course, a record.
Wow.
For such
Yes.
an election. And that's encouraging. I mean, we don't want people going to the polls, but we do want people to vote. And it
Right.
sounds like maybe that's working. In Georgia, I saw that they're going to actually mail absentee ballots to every active voter. But their election is in May, and ours is on April 7th. And
Right.
it's late in the game to be able to do something like that.
Very, very late in the game. Hi, Hildy. How are you? The Republicans responded yesterday to the governor's foreshadowing of this safer at home order. They were not happy. It sounds like they were not briefed, not consulted, and did not receive sufficient explanation. For the most part, they have kept their comments to be supportive and reserved. Do you sense a kind of a breaking of that, a little more partisan anxiety there in Madison?
I think we're starting to see a little more of that, right? The press releases mostly criticizing both the timing and I think what the point that you made earlier, which was that perceived lack of transparency or lack of information on why this is happening. So I mean, I'm hopeful that, like you said, today's press conference was a lot more informative on that front, and hopefully we can get back on track and back in agreement on those things. But it does seem like that brief detente is maybe starting to crumble just a little bit.
The legislature will have to come in virtually, probably, at some point for a COVID-19 related package of legislation, I imagine. Enabling legislation, perhaps relief, tax relief, what have you. Any word on that? I know that the rules allow it, but has there been any public pronouncements or any things you've heard behind the scenes?
No, I mean, like you said, the rules allow it. The conversations are certainly happening, but I don't think there's really anything terribly concrete out there. And I imagine it would take a little bit of extra setup in advance to make something like that happen. So I would guess we'd hear talk before, too long if that were going to happen. I think yesterday the governor was asked about it, and he said, yes, it's going to have to happen. But I think he said he was asked, could it be as early as next week? And he said, no, probably not. So I think we're thinking a little bit more long term maybe there on that.
Well, now let's shift gears and go outside the bubble, and ironically, we'll refer to D.C. as outside the bubble. What a mess! What a mess!
What a mess.
There's an area where Republicans and Democrats definitely are not on the same page.
Definitely not. Closer, maybe getting closer. It's like we were on track for a minute and just veered off dramatically. I mean, the speeches that we've heard on the floor have been just harsh and awful, and a lot of blame being thrown around. And I think last I checked, Chuck Schumer said he thinks they're on the 2-yard line now as opposed to the 5-yard line yesterday. So maybe we're moving closer, but it's rough. What have you been? What's been standing out to you out there?
Well, right or left, I think Americans are sick of the opportunism and the power-based decision-making. They want steady leadership, and they want people to work together. And you can say it's Trump, you can say it's Nancy Pelosi. I think most of the public doesn't care about who's to blame right now.
Yeah.
They just want to know, what is the relief package, especially small businesses. This one's a little close to my heart, right? How
Yeah.
How are they going to have? There's the constitutional issue of takings here. when you restrict people's ability and you're taking their property or their right to execute their business plan away, what kind of relief is there in terms of compensation or grants or what have you? I know that there's a lot of small guy who's a plumber or an accountant or whatever. There's severe layoffs and furloughs happening, and people they don't want a Christmas tree where every pipe dream of the right or the left is added in the House or the Senate. And they don't want a blank check either, but they want something done. And I think calmer heads will prevail. I mean, look, I was very critical of the Trump administration and their slow response, especially when it came to getting personal protective equipment to our first responders, which is the front lines here of this whole pandemic response. But I do think that the individual agencies have adapted and have gotten their acting gear. I'm thinking specifically of the Department of Education, where they have reacted to and waived certain regulations regarding getting additional aid based on classroom hours or special ed services or whatever. They're not letting red tape get in the way of moving forward. I'd like to see that spirit of cooperation continue elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I think that's the hope. Yeah.
The Wisconsin delegation has so far split along party lines on every vote. I don't think that will change. But what are you looking out for? Here's the part of the show where we talk about what to watch out for. What are you looking for in the next week of the new normal?
I mean, I do think just to touch back on the delegation, it is interesting. I was just reading that Wisconsin was actually the only state where the delegation was completely split on partisan lines, which is what we're used to. But it is interesting that we were the only state. So in part, I'm interested, I guess, in seeing if that partisan trend goes one way or the other. But what I'm watching for is exactly what you and I were talking about earlier, is what is the legislature going to do? How quickly can they figure out, how to get in? Can they continue to work with the governor and come up with some sort of aid package that fills in the blanks in terms of what's coming from the federal government? How about you?
I am looking to see what they're going to do with this April 7th election. People have to staff the polls. Who staffs the polls? Predominantly the most vulnerable people to this virus. Yep. You're supposed to not congregate. Limit your circle of interaction to the same 5 people. Except for on April 7th, when just go stand in line, wait. The lines are going to be longer because there's fewer poll workers. I mean, it makes no sense. So I'm looking forward to see how that all shakes out.
I was encouraged to see some of my fellow millennials, since we always get a bad rap, have actually been registering to work as poll workers if they're not with a job right now or are looking for a way to fill their time and try to do their part and get some of those vulnerable folks out of those positions. So that was
I've been a poll worker twice in my life, once when I was in college and once when I was in my 20s. It can be done. You don't have to.
It can be done.
You don't have to be 110 to go to the poll. Well, I think that wraps it up for this week's social distance episode of Battleground Wisconsin. Jessie, you be well, okay?
You too.
All right, for Jessie Opoien, I'm Brian Fraley. This has been Battleground Wisconsin Now with Fraley and Opoien.